My daughter screamed my name from the driveway like I'd committed a crime against her. 2 minutes later, my son-in-law pulled up in that rusted pickup with something in the back seat that made my stomach drop. But what happened when he stepped through my front door that afternoon is something the whole neighborhood still talks about. Before we get there, I need to take you back to the morning it all started to unravel. I run 3 miles every morning. Have since my days on the force, 31 years with the Nashville Metro Police Department, the last 9 as a detective with property crimes. My knees remind me daily that I'm 63 now, not 33, but I run anyway. Routine is the thing that keeps a man upright when everything else goes sideways. My wife, Margaret, understood that about me. She used to have coffee waiting when I came through the back door, steam curling up from the mug on the counter, and she'd be standing at the kitchen window watching the birds at her feeder without turning around. She always knew when I was back, said she could hear my breathing change when I hit the back steps. Margaret passed 2 years before any of this happened. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the day I sat alone in that kitchen and couldn't figure out what to do with the mug I'd automatically reached for in the cabinet. The point is, the house was mine. Had been ours for 26 years, but now it was mine, and every corner of it held something of her, especially the backyard. Margaret had put in a rose garden the 3rd summer we lived there. 12 bushes, all different varieties. She'd researched them for months, had notebooks full of notes about soil pH and pruning schedules. Every spring, that corner of the yard turned into something that stopped people on the sidewalk. Neighbors would lean over the fence just to get a closer look. My son-in-law paved it over for a parking spot. That's not where the story starts, but it's where I should have acted, and I didn't. I absorbed it. Told myself it was just a garden. Told myself my daughter had married this man, and I needed to keep the peace. I swallowed it down like I swallowed the loud music, the refrigerator emptied of groceries I'd bought, the friends showing up at midnight on weekdays, the cable subscription I was paying for running 18 hours a day on a television I never watched anymore because it was always occupied. 2.5 years of swallowing. They had moved in on a Tuesday, in April. My daughter calling me the Sunday before to explain that her husband had lost his job at the trucking company, and they were 3 weeks behind on rent, and could they stay just until he got back on his feet? I said yes. Didn't hesitate. She was my daughter, the child I'd coached through Little League, even though she wanted to be there about as much as I wanted a root canal. The one who'd cried on my shoulder for 4 hours the night before her wedding because she was nervous and happy at the same time and didn't know what to do with either feeling. I said yes. What I did not say was, here are the rules. Here is how this works. Here is what happens if it doesn't. I left all of that unsaid, and that silence became the blueprint for everything that followed. My son-in-law was 36, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who took up more space than he needed and knew it. He'd cycled through jobs since I'd known him: trucking, then warehouse logistics, then a brief period where he talked about starting a landscaping company, and bought $3,000 worth of equipment that sat in my garage gathering dust. He had opinions about everything, and a selective memory about which ones he'd expressed. When he was in a good mood, he called me by my first name. When he wasn't, he didn't call me anything at all. My daughter was 34. She'd worked at a dental office for 6 years, scheduling and billing, good at it from what I understood. But somewhere in those 2.5 years under my roof, she'd started absorbing her husband's sense of entitlement, the way fabric absorbs smoke, slowly, invisibly, until it was just part of how she smelled. The rose garden went in month 4. My son-in-law told me it was impractical to keep his truck on the street and that the side yard gravel didn't drain right, and the best solution was to expand the concrete pad around back. When I pointed out that the concrete pad sat adjacent to Margaret's roses, he looked at me with this expression I can only describe as patient condescension, the look of a man explaining something obvious to someone he's decided is slow. "It's just plants," he said. "I'll put in new ones, if it matters that much to you." He never put in new ones. I took photographs of the roses before they came out, printed them on good paper, and put them in a frame in my bedroom. That was the extent of my protest, and even then, I did it quietly, after they'd gone to bed. The morning everything changed. I came back from my run and found mail scattered across the kitchen table. My mail. Opened. I stood there in the doorway with sweat still cooling on the back of my neck, looking at envelopes I hadn't touched, a statement from my bank, a letter from my mortgage servicer, a piece of certified mail I had been expecting from my financial advisor about my pension rollover. All of it torn open, all of it face up on the table like someone had been reading it and walked away mid-thought. I didn't confront anyone immediately. Old habits from detective work. Observe first, ask later. I gathered everything carefully, took it to my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed reading through each piece. The bank statement looked undisturbed. The letter from my mortgage servicer was an annual escrow notice. Routine. The piece from my financial advisor was the one that caught my attention. It confirmed a change of address request that I had not submitted. The forwarding address listed was a P.O. box I'd never seen. Nashville zip code, but not my neighborhood. I sat with that for a long time. In 31 years of property crimes, I had seen this pattern so many times I could have described it in my sleep. Someone obtains another person's financial documents. They redirect mail. They gather enough personal information to impersonate. Then they apply for credit in that person's name, equity loans against property they don't own, credit cards, lines of financing. By the time the victim notices, the damage is done and unwinding it takes years. I was a retired detective. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I did not go into the kitchen and ask who opened my mail. I went to my closet, took out the shoebox where I kept spare documents, and checked the contents. Everything appeared to be there: my deed, my vehicle titles, my social security card, my passport. I photographed each document with my phone, front and back, timestamps on every image. Then I locked them in the small fireproof box I kept on the shelf above my dress shirts. I called my bank from the bedroom with the door closed and verified that no new accounts, no loan applications, no inquiries had been filed against my information. The representative confirmed nothing unusual. Good. I asked her to flag my account for any suspicious activity and to require a secondary verification call to my cell phone for any changes. Then I sat down and thought about what came next. My son-in-law wanted something from this house. Not just a place to live rent-free. Something more. A man who paves over a rose garden to park his truck doesn't think of himself as a guest. He thinks of himself as someone who belongs here permanently. And a man who opens mail, addressed to the property owner, and redirects financial correspondence to a P.O. box, isn't planning to leave on his own. I left before they woke up that morning, drove to the Waffle House on Charlotte Pike, and ordered coffee and eggs, and sat in a corner booth with my notebook, writing down everything I knew in the way I used to organize case notes. Timeline, evidence, unknowns, next steps. The first call I made was to my attorney. Not a family law attorney, my personal attorney, a man named Raymond who had handled Margaret's estate and my property taxes for 15 years. I told him what I'd found. He went quiet for a moment, then told me to come in that afternoon and bring the change of address notice and any other documents I had. His office was on West End Avenue, 12 floors up, clean lines, and good furniture. Raymond was 68, careful, the kind of lawyer who listened completely before speaking. He read through everything I brought, asked 3 questions, then leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "Here's your situation," he said. "What you're describing with the mail redirecting a property owner's correspondence to a third-party address that's potentially mail fraud, which is a federal offense, and potentially a preliminary step toward mortgage fraud or identity theft, both serious. But right now what you have is a suspicious change of address that might be explained innocently and mail that was opened, which is a federal crime but difficult to prosecute without more. What do I need? You need to know whether any credit or loan applications have been filed using your property as collateral," he said. "And you need to know who set up that P.O. box." He walked me through the steps. Credit freeze on all 3 bureaus, done before I left his office on my phone. Formal inquiry with the Postal Service about the change of address submission, who filed it and when. And I needed to proceed with the eviction on parallel tracks, because even if the mail situation turned out to be innocent, 2.5 years of a live-in arrangement with no lease had already created a tenancy relationship under Tennessee law that required formal notice to dissolve. I'm going to be honest with you, Raymond said, leaning forward. If someone in that house filed a change of address on your behalf and set up a P.O. box to intercept your financial mail, they were building towards something. The eviction is how you take back your home. The documentation is how you make sure they face consequences for the rest of it. We spent 90 minutes going through Tennessee eviction statutes. No lease, no formal rental agreement. They were what's called tenants at will, which meant I could terminate the arrangement with 30 days written notice. If they refused to leave, I filed in General Sessions Court, and if the court ruled in my favor and they still wouldn't go, I could have the sheriff remove them. I filled out the preliminary paperwork in his office. Raymond would file it the next morning. I shook his hand and drove home. My son-in-law's truck was in the driveway, the concrete sitting where Margaret's roses used to be. I parked on the street, went inside through the front door, walked through the living room past my daughter sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, and went to my bedroom without a word. Locked the door, lay on my bed, and stared at the ceiling for a while. Through the walls, I could hear my son-in-law in the kitchen, talking on the phone, laughing at something, the refrigerator opening and closing. He had no idea. In his mind, whatever he was building toward was still on schedule. The formal notice was served 11 days later. A process server knocked on my front door on a Wednesday morning at 9:45. I'd timed it deliberately. My son-in-law left for wherever he went most mornings around 9:15. My daughter didn't leave for work until 10:30. The window, when she was alone. She opened the door and stood there looking at the process server, then at the documents in his hand, then at me standing in the hallway behind her. "What is this?" she said. "It's a 30-day notice of termination of tenancy," I said. "I need you and your husband to find other housing arrangements. You have 30 days from today." Her face went through several stages in about 4 seconds. Confusion, then disbelief, then something I recognized as the beginning of anger, even though she hadn't committed to it yet. "Dad," her voice had dropped to something careful and quiet. "Dad, you're evicting us? I'm giving you 30 days to find another place to live. That's actually more than the legal minimum." I kept my voice level. Tone is everything in an eviction conversation. I'd learned that watching landlords make mistakes over 3 decades. The ones who got emotional gave the tenants ammunition. The ones who stayed factual kept the process clean. "Is this because of the mail?" She took a step toward me, and I noticed her eyes were moving fast, calculating. "Did he tell you about that?" She caught herself, stopped. I let the silence sit there between us for a moment. "You should call him," I said. "Let him know. 30 days starts today." I walked back to my bedroom and closed the door. 2 minutes later, I heard her on the phone, voice pitched low, but carrying the kind of intensity that travels through walls regardless. "He's evicting us, right now. The lady just gave me papers." I know. Get home now." My son-in-law came home 45 minutes later. I heard the truck before I heard the door. He didn't bother knocking on my bedroom door, just pushed it open. I'd unlocked it before he arrived, deliberately, and stood there with the 30-day notice crumpled in his left hand. He was a big man, I said that already. Filled the doorway, had a way of using his size as a conversational opener. "You're serious," he said. I was sitting at my desk, reading a book, or appearing to read a book. I set it down and looked at him. "The paperwork is pretty clear," I said. "After everything we've done for this house?" His voice had that quality I recognized from years of interviewing people who were about to say something they'd miscalculated. Like he'd been preparing this argument for a while, and couldn't see yet that it had holes in it. "We've put time and money into this place, Walter. We've been here keeping it up while you run around and do whatever you do. You can't just throw us out." "It's my house," I said. "My name is on the deed. Always has been. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on any mortgage document. You have no legal ownership interest in this property." "That's not my opinion. That's the county assessor's record." He stepped into the room. Not lunging, not threatening exactly, but the kind of step that's meant to communicate that he was willing to escalate. "You think you're being real smart right now," he said. "You think you're clever. I think you should talk to a lawyer," I said, "so you understand what your options are. But the 30-day clock started this morning. He said several other things. I won't reproduce them here because they weren't interesting. They were the kind of things people say when they're trying to make a situation feel dangerous enough that the other person backs down. I had spent 31 years in rooms with people who were better at that than he was. When he'd finished, I picked up my book. He slammed the door on the way out, hard enough that the frame shook. The Cold War that followed was textbook. My daughter stopped cooking entirely, which had been one of the arrangements I bought groceries. She cooked 3 nights a week. That stopped. The music volume increased. Dishes accumulated in the sink. My son-in-law began parking his truck partially across the end of the driveway, blocking my exit, then claiming it wasn't intentional. I documented every incident. Dates, times, photographs where applicable. I am a retired property crimes detective. Documentation is not a skill I had to develop. It is a reflex. On day 12, I got a call from Raymond. He didn't lead into it, just said, "Your son-in-law applied for a home equity line of credit against your property 3 weeks ago. The application was submitted online with your name, your social security number, and listed the P.O. box as your address for correspondence. The bank flagged it because the address didn't match their records for your account, and with the credit freeze in place, it bounced. But the application is sitting in their fraud department." I stayed quiet for a moment. "Federal crime," Raymond said. "Bank fraud, identity theft, fraudulent use of another person's social security number, attempted fraudulent encumbrance of real property. We're not talking about someone who opened mail out of curiosity. This person attempted to borrow against your house without your knowledge." "I want to report it," I said. "That's what I'd recommend. Financial Crimes Unit at Metro Nashville, and potentially the FBI given the federal statutes involved. I'll contact the bank's fraud department to get you copies of the application materials. You'll want to see what information he had." I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Home Depot for about 10 minutes after that call. My son-in-law had tried to take out a loan against my house. The house with Margaret's name on the history of it, the house I'd worked 31 years to pay off, the house where we'd raised our daughter, where I'd come back to after Margaret died, because there was nowhere else that felt like the right place to be sad. He had gathered my personal information, redirected my mail, set up a receiving address, and submitted a credit application in my name. And my daughter had known. That slip, when the notice was served. "Is this about the mail? Did he tell you?" She'd caught herself, but not fast enough. I drove to the Metro Nashville Financial Crimes Unit and asked for a detective. The detective I spoke with was younger than my daughter. Sharp eyes, took notes on a legal pad. I laid out everything: the open mail, the redirected address, the credit freeze, the flagged application at the bank. She asked clear questions. I gave her clear answers. When I finished, she looked at her notes for a moment. "Mr. Frost," she said, "do you have the documentation you've described? Photographs, the change of address notice, the notice from your financial advisor?" "Every piece," I said. "I have a folder in my car." She walked out with me to the parking lot and photographed everything I had on the spot. Told me the bank's fraud department would be subpoenaed for the application, that the P.O. box registration would be traced, that assuming the records showed what I'd described, they would be looking at multiple felony charges, including bank fraud and identity theft, both of which carried significant federal sentencing exposure. "How long before anything happens?" I asked. "Investigations take time," she said. "But if you're asking whether this is serious, yes, this is serious." I went home, made dinner, ate alone in my bedroom, and slept better than I had in months. The 30 days elapsed on a Friday. My daughter and her husband had not moved out. I had not expected them to. Raymond filed in General Sessions Court on Monday morning. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, my son-in-law's behavior went from cold to calculated. He started taking photographs of things in the house, common areas, maintenance issues, things I assumed he'd discussed with whatever legal advice he'd sought, probably trying to build a counterclaim. My daughter started leaving me handwritten notes, long ones, full of language about how much they'd contributed, how the arrangement had been a partnership, how I was being manipulative and cruel to a member of my own family. I kept every note, dated them, filed them. One evening I came back from my run to find my son-in-law standing in the kitchen holding a printout of something, watching me come through the back door. "You know what you're doing to this family," he said. I walked past him to the sink and ran water over my wrists, the way I do to cool down after a run. "You're going to regret this," he said. "When this is over, you'll be alone in this house, with nothing but your memories and your attitude. Your daughter won't speak to you. Your grandchildren won't know who you are." "We don't have grandchildren," I said. He didn't have an answer for that. I dried my hands and went to my room. The court date came on a Wednesday. I wore slacks and a button-down, the same kind of professional neutral I used to wear to court when I was testifying. Raymond sat beside me. The courtroom was small, fluorescent lights, worn benches, a judge who'd clearly seen 1,000 cases that looked exactly like this one. My son-in-law and my daughter sat across the aisle with a man I assumed was a lawyer, though he looked uncertain about everything that was happening. The judge reviewed the filings and looked at the empty seats where tenants should have been more cooperative. He asked me direct questions. I answered them directly. I had the property deed, proof of the notice delivery, documentation of the tenancy arrangement, and its terms, such as they were. Their lawyer made a brief argument about the contributions my son-in-law had made to property maintenance. The judge asked for documentation. The lawyer didn't have documentation. The judge looked at the man over the top of his reading glasses with an expression that judges reserve for attorneys who have shown up underprepared. 10 minutes. That's how long it took. Writ of possession granted. Effective within 5 business days. I walked out of that courthouse into gray November sky and stood on the steps and let the cold air sit on my face for a moment. Raymond came out behind me and shook my hand. "That's step 1, he said. "The other situation is still developing. The detective called me yesterday. They have a positive ID on the P.O. box, registered in your son-in-law's name." I absorbed that. Didn't say anything for a moment. "When they execute the writ," I said, "will he know about the fraud investigation?" "Not necessarily. Those are separate proceedings. He may not know how far along it is." "Good," I said. "I want him to think this is over when they leave." Raymond gave me a look that was part professional admiration, part something more personal. He'd known Margaret. He'd sat in my living room and helped finalize her estate while I was still barely functional from grief. "You always were methodical," he said. The locksmith came on a Friday morning. I'd arranged it the same way, knew their schedule, knew they left for coffee at 9:30 like it was written in stone. The locksmith arrived at 9:45, a woman in her 50s who ran her own shop, efficient and no nonsense. She had all 3 locks changed by 11:15. I stood in my living room and waited. They came back at 11:42. I watched through the window as my daughter reached the front door first, tried her key, tried it again, stepped back, looked at the door, looked at the window and saw me. Her expression was something I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not desperation. Something in between those, with a layer of realization underneath. Like she'd been running a story in her head for a long time, and was now watching it diverge from reality in real time. She pounded on the door. Her voice was surprisingly controlled. "Dad, open the door. Our things are inside. You can't do this." My son-in-law came up the walk behind her, tried the door himself, tried the back, came back to the front. He wasn't controlled. His face had gone through several colors by the time he came around to the front window and looked through the glass at me, standing in my own living room. "You think you've won something," he said, voice loud enough to carry through the glass, through the walls, to the neighbors who were already paying attention. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming." I held up the writ of possession so he could see it through the glass. Court document, judge's signature, Harris County stamp, visible from where he stood. I had moved it to my left hand so my right hand could hold my phone, which was already dialing. He couldn't read it through the glass, but he knew what it was. His face changed. Something shifted behind his eyes, the calculation, the backup plan, whatever he'd been holding in reserve. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own phone. My daughter grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said, just loud enough that I could hear it. "Don't make it worse." He pulled his arm back, started toward his truck, came back, stood in the driveway, looking at the house with the expression of a man who was deciding something. I was still on the phone. He opened the truck, reached into the back seat, and pulled out a short length of steel pipe. Not a crowbar, smaller, the kind of thing kept in a truck for leveraging stuck mechanical parts. He held it at his side and walked back toward the front door. That's what I'd been watching for. 911. What's your emergency? My son-in-law is on my property, and he's picked up a weapon, I said. I have a court-issued writ of possession. He's been legally evicted. He is standing outside my door with a steel pipe. The address is 4217 Millbrook Drive. I need officers now. Sir, are you inside? Are the doors locked? All 3 entrances are locked, I said. New deadbolts installed this morning. I'm safe inside. He hasn't attempted entry yet. But tell them to approach from the side yard. The gate on the right side of the house is unlatched, and there's a walkway to the back. If they come up the front, he'll see the car, and he'll run. Can you relay that to the responding units, sir? I already said it once. Units are approximately 9 minutes out. Stay on the line. My daughter had moved to the edge of the yard, arms crossed, not looking at me. She knew something had broken, the way you can feel a bone break before the pain arrives. She knew, and she was standing apart from it, which was the first honest thing I'd seen from her in 2 years. My son-in-law stood at my front door. He placed the pipe against the doorframe, testing it, not breaking in yet, threatening, making sure I could see him. I made sure I could see him too, on the recording app on my second phone, propped against the stack of books on my side table, angled at the door. The writ lay on the coffee table in front of it, face up, easy to read on camera. 7 minutes. He swung the pipe, not at the door, at the potted plant on my front step. The ceramic one Margaret had bought at a market in Chattanooga on our 22nd anniversary, burgundy glaze. Her initials scratched on the bottom in her own handwriting. It shattered across the front walk. My daughter said his name sharply from the yard. He said something back to her I didn't catch. Raised the pipe again. I heard the side gate. 2 officers came around the corner of the house, with the particular kind of controlled speed that means they've done this before and know exactly how much urgency the situation requires. My son-in-law was still facing the front door. He heard them a half-second before they spoke. Nashville police, don't move. Set it down. Set it down right now. He turned. The pipe was still in his hand. His eyes went from the officers to the door to my daughter to the neighbors who had materialized on porches and sidewalks the way neighbors do when something is being permanently decided on a quiet street. Every bit of performance left his face. What replaced it was just a man looking at consequences he'd been certain he'd avoided. The pipe hit the front walk. On your knees. Hands behind your head. My daughter put her hands over her mouth. I opened my front door and stepped outside. The lead officer was a woman in her mid-30s, name tag reading OKA4, with the brisk professionalism of someone who doesn't need a situation explained to her. She looked at me, looked at the writ in my hand, looked at the shattered pot, looked at the pipe on the walk. You called this in? That's right. I handed her the writ and the folder I'd been holding, property deed, writ of possession, eviction filing documentation, photos of the damage they'd accumulated inside. I had everything organized by category with labeled tabs, the way I used to organize case files. She flipped through it while her partner kept eyes and hands on my son-in-law. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the slight adjustment in her posture that happens when someone recognizes a well-prepared situation. The destroyed property, she said, glancing at the ceramic shards. That pot was my wife's. I have photographs of it intact from this morning and video of him striking it just now. I gestured to my phone in the window. She looked through the glass at the recording setup. Slight nod. My daughter had not moved from the edge of the yard. She was watching everything with the stillness of someone who has stopped trying to control the outcome. When Officer Okafor walked over to speak with her, she answered in a voice I could barely hear. I watched her sign something. I watched her hand the officer her identification. They put handcuffs on my son-in-law against the hood of his truck. He turned his head and found me standing on my front walk. This was the moment I'd been thinking about in a way I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself. Not the satisfaction of it, though I'd be lying if I said there was none, but the clarity. The thing that happens when a situation that has been blurry for 2.5 years finally resolves into sharp lines. You did this, he said. You set this up. I looked at him. "You set the whole thing up," he said. "You planned every step of this." I let the silence answer him. Officer Okafor came back to me. "Sir, in addition to destruction of property and criminal trespass, given that you mentioned a pending fraud investigation," she paused. "Professional, careful with the language. The arresting officers will flag his identity for the Financial Crimes Unit. If there's an active investigation involving this individual and this address, that information will be shared." I nodded. Raymond had spoken with the detective the previous afternoon. Timing had been coordinated, not theatrical, just methodical. When you spend 31 years doing a thing, you don't stop doing it because you've retired. There were 6 neighbors watching when they walked my son-in-law to the patrol car. Mrs. Abernethy from across the street with her hand over her mouth. The Weston family from 2 doors down, the father holding his youngest on his hip, a teenager on a bicycle who had stopped in the middle of the street. 3 other faces I recognized from years of living here. People who had watched my daughter's wedding from their porches. People who had brought food when Margaret died. They watched him get into the back of that car, and they watched me standing on my front walk in the cold November air with my hands quiet at my sides. And whatever story they'd been telling themselves about what was happening at the Frost House over the past 2.5 years rearranged itself into something accurate. My daughter collected personal belongings over the next 90 minutes under Officer Okafor's supervision. She worked without looking at me. Bags came out, a box, the television they'd bought. She moved efficiently, not frantically. And when she was done, she stood at the edge of my property with a look on her face I could not fully read. "I want you to know," she said, "that I didn't know it had gone that far." "I know you believe that," I said. "That's not what I said." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up 2 of the bags and carried them to the car she'd borrowed from her friend, and came back for the box. And when she drove away, she didn't look back. Raymond called at 4 that afternoon. "The financial crimes detective called me this morning," he said. "With the arrest, the P.O. box registration, and the bank's fraud department confirming the application, they have enough to charge. Bank fraud under federal statute, identity theft, fraudulent use of personally identifying information, fraudulent attempt to encumber real property. He's looking at multiple felony counts. Federal charges are likely, which means federal sentencing guidelines, not state." I sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in my house, and processed that. "He's not getting probation for this," I said. It wasn't really a question. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "No." Between the financial fraud counts and the criminal trespass and destruction of property from today, the district attorney is not going to be offering him a slap on the wrist. The federal component especially changes the calculus considerably. His attorney is going to have a very difficult conversation with him about his options. How long until arraignment? The trespass and destruction charges will go through county court quickly, probably within the week given the arrest today. The fraud charges will take longer as the federal case develops. "But Lonnie," he said, and he only used my first name when he wanted me to hear something that wasn't just legal strategy. "They have him. The documentation is airtight. The P.O. box is in his name. The application used your social security number and your property address and the box address for correspondence. This is not a situation where outcome is uncertain." I thanked him, set the phone down. The kitchen was quiet the way it used to be. The clock on the microwave said 4:22. Through the window, I could see the backyard, the concrete slab where the roses had been. I called a landscaping service the next morning, explained what I wanted. The woman I spoke with was patient and knowledgeable, asked questions about sun exposure and soil type, recommended a specialist in heritage rose varieties who did restoration work. I wrote down the number. The days after moved in a rhythm I'd almost forgotten. I ran in the mornings and the house was quiet when I came back. I made my own coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the birds at the feeder Margaret had hung from the eave 11 years ago. I slept in my own bedroom with the door open the way I used to, letting the house breathe around me. The contractor came on a Monday to repair the frame around the front door. Not just replace it, reinforce it, steel cord jamb, commercial-grade strike plate, the kind of installation that makes breaking in genuinely difficult. He also patched 3 holes in the drywall, replaced a cabinet hinge in the kitchen, and spent 2 hours repairing the hardwood floors where furniture had been dragged carelessly. He stood in the doorway when he finished, looking at the repaired entrance with a craftsman's satisfaction. "That'll hold," he said. "Whatever happened here, it won't happen that way again." I paid him in full, shook his hand, watched him go. The fraud charges were filed federally 3 weeks after the arrest. My son-in-law was arraigned on a Tuesday. Raymond called me that evening, his voice carrying the same matter-of-fact certainty it always carried when the facts were clearly arranged on one side. Federal prosecutor declined to offer anything less than a guilty plea on the primary bank fraud count, he said. Defense is negotiating the ancillary charges. Given the evidence, they don't have much leverage. We're looking at an 18 to 24-month custodial sentence on the federal count before any state charges layer in. "That's prison," I said. "Not probation." "That's federal prison, yes," Raymond said. "This isn't a case that ends with community service and an apology. What he attempted, using your personal information, redirecting your financial correspondence, submitting a fraudulent loan application against your home, the federal sentencing guidelines treat this seriously. As they should. I heard papers shuffle over the line. The restraining order is in place as of this afternoon," he added. 500 feet. Your address and person both covered. Violation sends him back into custody regardless of what stage his case is in. "Thank you, Raymond." There was a brief pause, the kind that carries something beyond professional courtesy. "She would have been proud of how you handled this," he said. "The whole thing." I didn't answer right away. Stood there in my kitchen with the phone warm against my ear, looking at the photograph of Margaret on the shelf above the stove, the one from the summer we went to Vermont, her standing in a field with that expression she got when she was happy and trying not to show it too much. "I know," I said. "My daughter texted on a Sunday morning about a month later. The message was long an apology," she said, though when I read it carefully it was more an explanation. "Things had gotten complicated," she said. She'd been confused. She'd let herself be led somewhere she shouldn't have gone. She missed me. She wanted to talk. I read it twice, thought about it for a while. Then I thought about the rose garden, about the photograph of Margaret in a trash bag with my clothes, about 2.5 years of making myself smaller, quieter, more invisible in my own house, about the morning I came back from a run and found my mail opened on the kitchen table and understood what kind of man my daughter had decided to protect over her own father. I typed my reply. "I hope you find a steady path. Don't contact me again for a while." I sent it, sat with the phone for a moment, then I set it face down on the table and walked outside. The rose specialist had come earlier that week. She'd spent an afternoon with a soil kit and a clipboard, taking notes, photographing the spot, asking me about the varieties Margaret had chosen. I'd shown her the photograph from my bedroom, the printed one. The roses at their peak in June, 12 varieties in bloom. She'd studied the photograph for a long time. "These are beautiful selections," she said. She knew what she was doing. She'd given me a timeline and a cost estimate and a list of the varieties she could source. Several were heritage breeds, harder to find, but not impossible. She had contacts at specialty nurseries across Tennessee and Kentucky. The garden could be restored, not identical, but close, she said, a working interpretation of what had been there. I'd said yes without asking about the price. I stood in the backyard now, looking at the concrete slab. The contractor was coming next week to break it up. The soil work would begin in spring. By June, there'd be something growing there. Not what Margaret had planted, you can't unlose time that way, but something alive where there'd been concrete. The cold air smelled like wood smoke from somewhere down the block. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the alley. The street sounds of a quiet neighborhood doing its ordinary Saturday work. I went inside, put coffee on, and sat at my kitchen table in the house that was mine. The whole house. Every room of it. Mine the way it had always been, and mine the way it would remain documented, defended, recovered. The way you recover anything worth keeping. Not by waiting for someone to return it to you, but by understanding exactly what it was worth and going to get it back. I raised my mug toward Margaret's photograph. She always told me I was too patient with people. I should have corrected earlier. She said it with love, the way she said most things, but she meant it. She was right. She usually was. I took a long sip of coffee and let the quiet of the house settle around me. The clock ticked. The heater hummed. Outside, the sky was going gray with November clouds, the kind that didn't always mean rain, just meant the season was doing what seasons do. Everything in order, everything where it belonged. If this story connected with you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We read every one. And to hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for being here.